Disney classics, original programs, National Geographic, Marvel TV shows and movies, Star Wars. Now, these are just some of the choices you'll get on Disney Plus. And this is the podcast for Disney Plus fans. Join Scott Murray, Regina Davis, and Nathan Chick as they bring you breaking news, programming recaps, in-depth discussions, and insightful interviews that will take your Disney Plus fandom to new levels. Welcome to the Disney Plus Streamcast.
Hello, and thank you for joining us for the Disney Plus Streamcast. I'm Scott Murray, and I'm normally joined by Regina Davis. However, she could not be with us today because, well, she was originally planning to, but she wasn't able to be here because she went on vacation and wasn't able to get back at the time she was hoping to get back. And needless to say, if you listen to the Geek Supreme, you know that happens to me too, so it's just that time of year. You take trips, and sometimes things don't always turn out, but we fully expect her to be back in 2 weeks. You know, this episode is out on June 12th. And if you are counting down the days until Disney Plus launches, that's a pretty significant day. That's a landmark day because we are now 5 months away from the launch of Disney Plus. We'll be able to see shows like The Mandalorian. That's pretty exciting. I mean, 5 months away, I don't know about you, but there's times where I think that feels like a long way away, and then I blink and it's there. So it will be here before we know it. Well, speaking of The Mandalorian, that is kind of the theme of today's show because later on, we're going to welcome Randy Therio from the Legends Library podcast. That's with the Coffee with Kenobi network. Now, I would assume that if you're a podcast listener and you love Star Wars, you've heard of Coffee with Kenobi, and you're probably listening to something at Coffee with Kenobi, maybe even Legends Library. If that's the case, then you know the quality of content that comes from that network. So we're very excited to have Randy here to talk about Mandalorians because, you know, we all have different entry points into the Star Wars universe now. It's not just limited to the original trilogy anymore, especially nowadays. And you just never know how much somebody may know about Mandalorians. Now, granted, we could probably spend several shows on this. In fact, I'm sure Legends Library has through the Legends books that have covered Mandalorian stories, but we're going to just touch on a few things that might just give you a little more of a well-rounded understanding of Mandalorians that might just help kind of boost your interest or maybe boost your investment into the show if your only knowledge maybe is, oh, that's the armor that Boba Fett wears. So that's the point of today's show. We'll catch that later on, but first, we need our news fix, and that means we need our first segment, News with Nathan. Hi, Nathan.
Why, hello, Scott. How's your day going?
Good. How was your week?
I've been just catching up with all my TV shows.
Me too.
And Overwatch League Stage 3, Burn Blue, and E3 this weekend.
Yes, the Dallas Fuel kind of laid an egg on Friday night, but they won Sunday.
Yeah.
Yeah, TV show-wise, we're pretty much all caught up. We got behind there for a while, but we finished up Goldberg's and Gotham this past week, so I think we're in good shape. So now we're just diving into some things that we've been meaning to get to before Jessica Jones starts.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, excited for that one. And I didn't see this until the news report earlier this week. I guess Kristen Ritter behind the camera for a couple of episodes.
Yes, she did.
That show, for me, I love Daredevil, obviously. It just has just such a dynamic feel, so very kinetic with all its action pieces.
Yeah.
And I love Luke Cage because the music, the soundtrack, it's just on point 100% every way. Iron Fist, we don't need to talk about Iron Fist, although season 2 was way better than season 1. But I think consistently with Jessica Jones, my only complaint with that is that maybe a couple of episodes too long every season.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's just spot on. They do such a great job with that. It's the one I'm consistently looking forward to every season.
What did you find in the news world this past week? I saw some things pop up myself. It's a couple of these things that I've seen here in recent days. You have to really kind of dig to find, but they're out there.
Yeah, absolutely. We talked about E3 earlier. we'll go straight into that because I just saw the Xbox panel or presentation as it is, showing 2 new Star Wars games. There's a new one from TT Games, the Lego Star Wars Skywalker Saga, which is going to cover all 9 movies.
Nice.
So if you're a fan of that, if you like smashing things up and collecting the bricks, more of that in store for you. And I think they do a pretty good job with the cutscenes as well. There's a real nice sort of deft sense of humor they have when they apply to all of those scenes. But the other one, Respawn showed bits from Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order.
Mm-hmm.
And I got to be honest, I couldn't stand the Force Unleashed games. Really hated them. This one looks like that was supposed to be. Great set pieces, really awesome action, and just the spectacle, the wow moments, they were all there. I don't know if you got to play Titanfall or Titanfall 2. Titanfall 2 had one of the best single-player campaigns that I've played in recent years. I absolutely loved it. And the fact that you get to do that in the Star Wars universe with, I think, a couple of cameos as well. They showed Saw Gerrera in the footage joining in. Yeah, that looks really, really good. I think that turned from a maybe buy to a must buy for me.
It's nice that we can actually look forward to something like this. After rumors of things and then games falling apart and then shutting down LucasArts. And, we've really had to kind of wait a little bit for something like this. I remember one of the last highly anticipated games we were supposed to get back before everything kind of fell apart was, I think it was 1313.
1313, indeed.
Yeah, so I remember when they announced that and even showed a little bit of footage of that at Celebration that year. So, yeah, I think it's just exciting to be able to actually know something's coming, having a release date, and be able to anticipate it.
Absolutely. And I got to be honest, anytime that I get to have lightsaber combat in a game, you've got a pretty good chance of having my money, and the footage looks superb. If it plays like it looks, I think it's a surefire hit.
I like going back every once in a while and hitting YouTube and seeing some of the old games and then think about, where things are today. And the other day I didn't watch the whole thing because it would have been difficult to do that. But this guy recorded the entire gameplay walkthrough of the Phantom Menace. And
right.
I remember playing that game all the way through, and I remember little things like getting irritated with Queen Amidala every time she kept saying, "You're stepping on my dress." Mm-hmm. I'm like, well, if you would just move. And then how tough it was to find all the parts in my brother and I are always quoting this guy that's in the bar that just goes, "You again? You again?"
Yeah, like you say, it's amazing just how far in the space of a decade, never mind lifetimes, how far the technology has come and just how much more immersive those games are. And while we're talking about immersion, I guess we have to talk about Galaxy's Edge. Early reviews being quite promising. I think you have to kind of take some of those with a slight grain of salt, though, because the crowds that people were expecting haven't been there. I saw somewhere a couple of Walt Disney blogs, tourist blogs, were saying that the average wait time in the mornings for Smuggler's Run is only 20 minutes.
Yeah, well, they've done a really good job of really kind of dealing with that. I mean, I watched people throughout that first week. I have friends who've gotten to go already. And I remember one guy showing at one point in time, Smuggler's Run was up to 90 minutes, and the next thing you know, it's down to 30. But I think they've just done a really good job managing the crowds. And I love the idea of these passes, or these little alerts you'll get, boarding passes, I think, where you can go and walk around the park and do other things, and then you get notified when it's your time to come and get in line. I think that's great. I was really not sure how they were going to pull some of this off, but I have to hand it to them. They've done a really good job, because I remember the first, few months that Harry Potter opened, when the line just to get into that section of the park was hours long. And I think Disney just really wanted to not let that happen, especially at Disneyland, which doesn't cover as much ground as World. And I think they did a good job. I even saw something where it looked like the lines to get into the cantina were getting kind of long. People were waiting a long time, so They immediately jumped on that and configured that to where you could go in without having to wait a long time. So I think they've done a really good job, because they showed everybody trying to get in the entrance, and then once everybody was in, it was clear.
Yeah, I guess to what you said about Oja's Cantina, that's been one of the really big draws, and the line for that has been one of the longer ones. Also, Savvy's lightsaber workshop.
Yes.
I know they've reported people leaving empty-handed because it's run out of parts by midday or so. But for the most part, it's been a really positive experience. If you have the app and you use the app, it's very heavy on the lore.
Yes.
And there's a lot of interactivity there. I feel like that experience isn't probably something that's going to translate to Walt Disney World. If you remember, Walt Disney World has oodles and oodles and oodles of hotel rooms that partner up with, or hotels that partner up with it, lots of hotel rooms. If we're talking reservations to get into Galaxy's Edge, and you only get one of those right now if you book at a Disneyland resort, well, Disneyland has only got 3,000 rooms. I think Walt Disney World has about 30,000 rooms. So there's a definite shift in the scale of the number of people who are going to have reservations trying to get into Galaxy's Edge when that opens later on this year. But I think if you're a fan, I don't know that you're going to balk at the chance to wait an hour in line to buy some blue milk anyway.
That's right. I mean, I've actually been to World a lot more times than I've been to Land, but it looks like my first opportunity might be going to Land in the fall. We'll see what happens.
Oh, man, I'm jealous. You're so lucky. That's brilliant.
I'm hoping. Well, I mean, I'm going for BlizzCon, so I'm hoping while I'm there for BlizzCon, I can swing into Galaxy's Edge. And, of course, that's, October, so this thing might be completely under control by then, you would hope.
Absolutely, absolutely. If anyone can do it, they can do it.
That's right.
So we'll talk content for a minute, get to nuts and bolts, back to the whole Disney Plus thing. So because Disney publicly traded company, there's always all these little nuggets of information that come up from investors or people speculating on the stock. And a couple of things I saw this week that I just wanted to jump on. Disney was under fire a little bit for not spending enough money on their content. And the initial reports were for this year, Disney was going to spend between $500 million to $1 billion on new content, which sounds like a lot. But compared to someone like Netflix, which is apparently spending $15 billion this year on new content, 85% of everything they show now, they want to be a Netflix original. Mm-hmm. It sort of pales in comparison. Now, that's going to jump up a little bit for Disney. By 2024, they expect to spend about $2.5 billion on that. But my feeling is the amount of money probably doesn't matter because it's what the content actually is. If you look at someone like HBO, who last year I think they spent about $2.25 billion on content, and yet you've had things like Chernobyl, Game of Thrones, Westworld. They've had some really, really amazing shows, some really fantastic reviews. I don't know that I can say that about a lot of Netflix myself. It's not my favorite. I do keep it for the kids. But it's once the Marvel shows leave, I don't know that I have a lot for myself to watch on there, although I suppose there's the odd bit of Brit drama here and there.
Yeah.
But I think whenever all these investors are getting all worked up about, well, it's only $2.5 billion by 2024, they're being wildly outspent by Netflix, I would say this. There's a UK research firm called Ampere Analysis who, at the end of last year, after the Disney-Fox merger, they took stock of who was making what in the independent industry. Who was making what in the entertainment industry. And 23% of all US TV and movie production and 11% worldwide is done by Disney now.
Yeah.
For a total spend of $22 million a year on content.
Yeah, I think that's of all things to be getting a little up in arms about, because I think there's an element of quantity and quality here, because, at the end of the day, it's about subscribers too. If we're just going to talk about the streaming services, we have our colleagues over at What's on Disney Plus. We both shared this story. We shared it from them, and they found this study that showed that already in their demographic, there's 22% of people that are interested in Disney Plus, and we're still 5 months away. And it's, as they said, they hadn't even started really marketing this thing yet.
Right.
There's just so many things that they're bringing to the table, though, that the others aren't. And sometimes you have to spend, I wonder how much of that is marketing. Because, I've listened to the people on the radio talk about how much money they spend on just marketing for Endgame. That's probably one of the bigger spends, I would think, here, because I even said I still come across people who aren't aware of the live action shows that are coming, and they're supposedly, fans of these things, and they don't know that there's a Loki series coming or a Star Wars series coming. So I think marketing is really where the spend is at when the time is right. But I think once everybody starts to, know about it, and I think that'll come when things like D23 come out and they start showing footage and bigger announcements, make bigger news. And they start promoting these things on the Disney Channel and on ABC, then suddenly I think that'll be a total game changer. And then you're going to be talking about the number of subscribers they're going to have on that first day. And I think that'll calm those people a little bit. I don't think they have to worry about how much is being spent on the content. I think the content's going to be good, and I think people are going to watch it.
Oh, for sure. I think going back to Ampere Analysis, the poll that they did last month of 1,000 US consumers, 34% of the people in the 18 to 24 demographic and 36% of households that have children intend to subscribe to Disney Plus. That's not necessarily instead of another streaming service.
Sure.
It's $7 a month. It will be in on top of, but that's still a subscriber.
Yeah. Well, no, and I mean, we did that the last show. We had granted it wasn't a huge scientific poll, but we did ask people, how many subscription services do you plan to be attached to by the time Disney Plus comes out? And most people were answering they expected their subscriptions to be still 3, 4, or more, even once it comes out.
Right. And I guess the last thing I would want to say about quality and spend, speaking to how highly, I guess, Bob Iger holds Disney Plus in his thoughts, he's recently gone and created a new position for talent and casting. A.O. Davis, who is a 16-year veteran of ABC casting, she cut her teeth overseeing casting for things like Lost, Desperate Housewives. She's also done recently, when she's been in charge of Disney Studios and ABC Studios and ABC Entertainment, she oversaw the casting for The Good Doctor, Blackish, How to Get Away with Murder. She's now had her purview expanded, and she's in charge of all the Disney entertainment as well as Disney Plus, and that's scripted, unscripted. She gets to take a hand in that, and that's a lady who has quality written all over her resume.
Yep.
They're not just relying on the vault to
right.
make this good. They're actually want it to stand by itself and actually stand for something. And that to me is impressive. That speaks a lot as to the quality of the service you're going to get. It's not a delve in the archives. It's going to be good stuff. It's going to be new stuff. It's the stuff you want, even if it's just an epilogue for like Endgame and all the Star Wars movies. It's still stuff you want.
Yeah,
and that makes me excited.
Definitely in good hands.
Yes, sir. And Scott, that's about what I've got this week.
Well, that's definitely a lot to think about between video games and things that we're learning as things get closer. So I'm sure some more news will break in the next couple of weeks, because it seems like we barely go through a couple of days without something popping up, which is good. It gives us something to talk about, but it also gets us a little more excited. So as always, I appreciate you being here and sharing that with us, and we look forward to talking to you again in 2 weeks.
Definitely. I'll catch you then, Scott.
All right, well, coming up, we'll take a look at our Twitter poll results and talk Mandalorians with Randy from the Legends Library podcast. If you are on Twitter, I hope you're following the Disney Plus Streamcast at Disney Plus Cast, because not only are you getting things like news and interactions with Disney fans there, I also like to post the occasional poll. In fact, I'm trying to do that every week. I asked a very specific question early in the week, and then I got a little creative with the second question, and I want to read you the question and results. I find them kind of interesting, especially the second one, but let's hit this first one first. As many of you know, we're about to go through the last season of Jessica Jones on Netflix, and Of course, we talked to Jeff Loeb on the last episode about bringing characters like Jessica to a streaming service. In fact, Jeff specifically talked about the marketing campaign that helped drive people to that show, the one that talked about knowing her name. And then, of course, one thing that Jeff could not talk about was whether or not we would see these characters at any point on Disney Plus, and that'll definitely be worth watching as we get into the first few years of the streaming service. So, with that in mind, I asked the question, if you could only choose one of these Marvel Netflix shows to continue on Disney Plus, which one would you pick? And if you've been watching these, you know what the choices are. Daredevil, Jessica Jones, Luke Cage, or The Punisher. I wasn't able to put Iron Fist in here because it only gives me 4 options. But most of the responses for Iron Fist were not very positive, so that was the one I decided to leave out. Although, for the record, I actually kind of liked both seasons of Iron Fist. But that's another story. So, what do you think was first, second, third, and fourth in this poll? Daredevil, Jessica Jones, Luke Cage, or The Punisher? Coming in fourth place at 6% was Luke Cage. I have to say this surprised me a little bit. Coming in at number 3 at 18%, we have The Punisher. Coming in second place, Jessica Jones. Jessica was at 24. Number 1 at 52% was Daredevil. So if it were up to the people that did this poll, Daredevil, if they could only have one, would be the show that came back to Disney Plus. So here's the second poll. Check this out. This is a little more fun because now we're talking about fake TV shows. Just for fun, it says, which of these fake TV shows would you watch on Disney Plus? Number 1, Porgs and Recreation. Number 2, Dancing with the Star-Lord. Or number 3, Breaking Beaker. In fact, I think that's a t-shirt. I think I've seen Breaking Beaker on a t-shirt. A parody of Breaking Bad, only with Beaker on it. So yeah, that comes to life, I guess. All right, so what do you think? Out of those 3, Porgs and Recreation, Dancing with the Star-Lord, or Breaking Beaker? You got a Marvel show, a Star Wars show, and a Muppets show. All right, number 3, coming in at 17%, we have Breaking Beaker. Number 2, at 33%, we have Porgs and Recreation. And then coming in at 50% is Dancing with the Star-Lord. I have to admit, that would be a pretty amusing show. I might actually watch that. I don't watch Dancing with the Stars, but I might actually watch that. How could you skip that? So many different things could happen if Star-Lord is leading a dance show on a streaming service. So if you follow us at Disney Plus Cast, I will definitely be putting out some more polls to gauge your opinion and obviously have some fun along the way too. All right, so we've gone from shows that aren't coming to the network, at least not yet. We have fake shows, so now it's time to get into a real show, a show that we know is coming to Disney Plus, and that is The Mandalorian. In fact, it will be available on the first day that we're able to turn on our TVs and access the streaming service. But if your only reference to Mandalorians is knowing that Boba Fett is wearing Mandalorian armor, or maybe it's Jango Fett for that matter, or both of them, you might just think, okay, well, these are just badass warriors that wear iconic armor, which you would be correct, by the way. But I thought it would be kind of interesting to have somebody on this week to dive a little bit further into the world of Mandalore and Mandalorians. As I mentioned at the beginning of the show, it'd be difficult to cover anything and everything, but I still think we could definitely have a good discussion with a knowledgeable person. And that person today is Randy Therio of the Legends Library podcast, which covers, obviously, Legends, the Legends series in Star Wars. It's also part of the Coffee with Kenobi podcast network, which provides plenty of great Star Wars discussions with all the hosts of those shows and producers of the shows. They do a great job. They're covering a lot of ground, and it's just a really good all-around celebration of all things Star Wars. So I've been looking forward to this discussion today, and I'm so glad Randy could be on the program. Randy, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to join us on the Disney Plus Streamcast.
Oh, thanks for having me, Scott. It's great to be here. Great to be talking about The Mandalorian and Mandalorians and culture. And I guess I should say, Oya, ROTC, which is hello, you non-Mandalorians in Mando. So
that's right. I think everybody was pretty excited about this announcement. Just first and foremost, they were getting a live-action Star Wars series was enough to get everybody excited.
Yeah.
But it was a really cool direction to go. It just shows how not only vast the universe is and how many things that Disney can do when it comes to just places that have been untapped and stories that haven't been told yet at time periods that take place in between the films. And it's interesting that you saw that first image in that iconic uniform, and simple enough, they called it the Mandalorian.
It's so cool where we're at right now. I know we're going to get more information as the year unfolds here, and as we get closer to the release of the show in November. But it seems as though right now there is a kind of a mystique, or there's a mysteriousness to this show. There isn't a lot of information out there, and it kind of fits with the character that we're all familiar with, which is Boba Fett. The most famous Mandalorian being Boba Fett, and that Mandalorian armor kind of fits with the mystique of that character. Where it's kind of mysterious. We've got, we know who the actors and actresses are going to be, and we don't know a lot about story, and so it seems to fit. Where we're at right now kind of seems to fit with the mystique of the whole Mandalorian culture.
Yeah, the other thing that I think we know is it takes place just a few years after the events of Return of the Jedi.
Correct, 5 years after, yeah.
Yeah. That's an interesting point, too, I would think, when it comes to the Mandalorians, because there were so many different things that happened over time when it comes to what their circumstances were, the different factions that broke off, different things that were happening during the wars. And the conflicts, and now you can definitely look online and get a pretty good sense as to what was happening during the original time period. How familiar are you with the state of Mandalorians and what was going on with them during like 4, 5, and 6 time period?
There's not a lot of information out there as far as the Mandalorian people. Even if we go back to the Clone Wars. Let's go back to the prequel trilogy. There was Jango Fett and Boba Fett. The clone son Boba Fett. But there seemed to be that the Mandalorians were sparse, and thankfully, thanks to a few novels and the Clone Wars animated series, we are given more information about the Mandalorian culture and Mandalore itself. During the original trilogy, we don't have a lot of information except for, again, that one character that met a really quick end in Episode 6.
Yes,
and we know a little bit. A little bit was given to us afterwards in the Legends material, but still, there's still that mystique. There's still not a lot of information out there, and I think that's kind of cool, especially since it's been a thing that Dave Filoni is very much into and very immersed into, just the knowledge of that people. But it's also been a protected area. It hasn't been really delved into up until this November. So
when you have people whose only entry point, granted, we have so many different places we can come from in Star Wars now. You mentioned the Clone Wars and Rebels, which, like you said, does shed some light on some stories surrounding Mandalore and the Mandalorians. But if you're one of those people that only knows that armor and reference as it relates to the two characters you also brought up, Boba Fett and Jango Fett, all you really know is those guys were pretty much badass warriors, but they were also bounty hunters. What do you want to share with people that that's really kind of the limit to their information, just as to kind of the culture and the race itself of Mandalorians and what they're like?
Lucasfilm with the Clone Wars and with the books, the Legends material, really backfilled the story of Boba Fett, or at least the Mandalorian culture. Mandalorian culture, it kind of goes in two different directions, because there was a differentiation between the books written by Karen Travis, the Republic Commando books, and some of the series following the Legacy of the Force series. The books that kind of spoke to Mandalorian culture was a very militant culture. There were clans, and there was honor in fighting and dying in battle. Their big parting goodbye to one another was shoot straight, run fast. And so they would raise their children in that same culture. And if husbands or fathers were killed in battle, the wives would pick up the mantle and continue on and continue to raise the kids in that Mandalorian militant kind of culture. It is a really cool culture that was kind of created by Karen Traviss and the books and that Legends kind of timeline. And then something really interesting happened when the Mandalorian culture was starting to be communicated to us through the Clone Wars animated series, where Mandalore had become a pacifist system.
Yeah.
That was in stark contrast to the material that had been published before that. But if you remember in the cartoon, there's also the Death Watch, and the Death Watch was in Death Watch. They were a faction of Mandalore that was in conflict with the pacifist mainstream, and they were still that militant kind of people holding on to, the Mandalore is a fighter, and the Mandalore is a warrior. Those are the two kind of veins or two different worldviews that were presented to us in the material that was, given to us at the time. And it seems as though the Mandalore TV show has kind of fallen into a place, or maybe the Mandalorian has kind of fallen through the cracks of all of that and is kind of making his way in the galaxy, unsure of purpose and unsure of calling, and kind of doing what most of the scum and villainy in the galaxy are doing, and that's making their way in the universe by offering themselves for hire.
I have to think that, despite not really knowing where he falls in those conflicts and those civil wars that have taken place in Mandalore over the direction of the civilization and the cultures, not knowing where this guy fits in on that, if he kind of fell through the cracks, it makes you wonder, outside of just making his way through the galaxy, which is also a great familiar phrase for them. You have to think that, you still obviously want to wear that armor. That armor
right.
seems to be pretty, not only famous with us, but a lot of people around the galaxy over the years. The boots and the gauntlets, and then the blaster and the jetpack and everything. And I think one of the things that made that armor so formidable was back when they were consistently fighting Jedi.
Mm-hmm. Right, and the idea that that not only the accoutrement, if you will, but the color scheme represented clan, their clan, and so that was just as important as the elements, like you said, the gauntlet and the jetpack and all of that. But the whole idea of wearing your clan's color scheme or your clan's colors was a big deal in Mandalorian culture, and we see, even in that, the footage, the short amount of footage that we've seen so far from the Mandalorian TV show, he's kind of neutral. He's not really. It's not like there's any kind of statement one way or another. There's no paint. There's no family crest or anything to speak, that we can see visually so far. And so again, that just leads to more and more of that mystique and
that intrigue.
Pedro Pascal is playing that role so well. What have we seen 3 minutes? But it seems as though like it's already that kind of feel. So
there's not necessarily the representation, at least doesn't seem, of a specific clan, but still you see that armor, and I think that's intentional to let enemies know, if you're going to mess with me, you might want to think twice about it, and then people who want to hire him look at that and go, oh yeah, this guy can get it done.
Absolutely. And, like you said, they were formidable foes of the Jedi. So it wasn't like, or I wouldn't just say the Jedi. It was anyone who was willing to hire them throughout the Legends timeline. Anyone who was willing to hire them, whether it was the Republic or the Empire or the New Republic, whatever organization was in charge of the galaxy at the time, it was totally acceptable to go hire the band of warriors. They were expensive, but they got the job done. And whether it was Sith, way back during the Old Republic, or Jedi during the New Republic, they were up to the task and did not have a fear of force-sensitive people like I guess the general public did.
even in Attack of the Clones, Django doesn't run from Obi-Wan.
No.
He's like, let's go.
Yeah.
Knowing full well what he's going to get. I mean, that's why it's so amusing, hearing him say, always a pleasure to meet a Jedi.
Right. And that kind of speaks back to, if you remember Boba Fett's response is, get him, Dad, get him.
Yeah,
There's that, that warrior mentality, even in a young child, it rings through. And so those values, the Mandalorian values and culture, it does ring true through the prequels and beyond.
An actual Mandalorian we got to know a little bit and gave us a little bit of perspective on them, more so than in the past, especially if you're somebody who hasn't read the books, read some of the Legends books, was obviously Sabine Wren and her family.
Yes. You're kind of given, because she's a female character, you're kind of given kind of this false idea of that it was a matriarchal society. But
right.
What's really cool about that is it wasn't that, but it wasn't like a patriarchal society either. It was just a warrior society.
Mm-hmm.
And, I remember when they first revealed that Sabine's father was like this artist, kind of was able to look at Sabine's art and say, oh, I see where you got that inspiration. Yeah. He was kind of an artist. And like, oh, no, that's another example of, when the father figure kind of puts down that mantle of warrior, then the mother is more than willing to pick up the sword and pass the torch, if you will, to the next generation.
It may be kind of blasphemous to put it this way, but I'm going to do it anyway.
All right.
It's almost like, in a mild parallel, you can almost say that the Mandalorians are almost like the Klingons when it comes to, that very distinctive, proud warrior race in this saga.
Yeah, especially in the pride, that pride or the honor thing, I think really rings through there. And there's some commonalities there. And is in stark contrast to, the Jedi, who are servants and selfless, and
yeah, right.
Or the Empire, who are politicians and manipulators, or military, but they're not willing to get their hands dirty, kind of.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Yeah.
Yes.
So Mandalorians are like, let's put on the armor and let's go get them, or even let's take off the helmet and go face to face and hand to hand if it needs to happen that way.
Now, you mentioned that, as many of us know, there isn't a lot of information out there that we know just yet regarding this story that they've shared with us yet. I'm sure it's going to tie to a number of things. And they'll do it in a way, I would think, too, that don't make it necessary that you've read this book or you've watched this show. Disney's done a really good job with that with the Marvel films. You don't have to be a hardcore comic book person to get interested in all the MCU films. But as far as what you know of the Mandalorians and what you've been able to read and see, do you have some things that you're kind of hoping will show itself, or an element of Mandalore or of Mandalorians that'll be showcased in some form or fashion in the series?
Okay, yeah, I do. There all through Mandalorian history, there's been a tradition of one Mandalorian, one leader, and he is called the Mandalore.
Yes.
And in the Legends material, Boba Fett, as he grew older, spoiler alert, he didn't die in episode 6. He was actually
Right.
saved from the Sarlacc pit and all that kind of
Yes.
stuff. But that's Legends now, so it's kind of a spoiler, but kind of not. But he was called the Mandalore, and all the way back through history, through the Mandalorian history, there was the Mandalore, the one person who was the leader of all the clans, who made the calls, who decided collectively if they were going to engage in a certain conflict or not, or decided. At one point, the Mandalore would decide, you're free to allow yourselves to be mercenaries and to make overall judgment calls and overall judgments for the good of Mandalore. And so I would like to see that. I mean, I know it's for some people that have followed the Legends timeline and that have followed the material for so long. I think that some people might say, well, that's cliche or whatever, but for a mysterious loner Mandalorian to discover that he is being called to become the Mandalore because leadership is needed, and he could be the one. I think that would be really cool, and I think that would really play into the Star Wars George Lucas reluctant hero's journey kind of thing, where he would be the reluctant Mandalore, but would finally find his purpose and calling, and would change as a character from a mercenary bounty hunter to someone that is worthy of the title of Mandalore. I just think it would be fun. I think it would be cool. But at this point, I'm just like everybody else. Whether you're a new Star Wars fan, whether the only thing you know about Mandalorian is Boba Fett, or you've read all the material that's available, it's still fun, and we're all in the same place. And that's what's such a cool thing about this time right now is we're all in the same place. None of us know anything except for a title and a few characters. So we're all speculating, and speculation really is half of the fun. Like, the first episode will come and we'll actually have answers, and it'll be kind of like, well, we have answers now, but man, it was really fun talking about what this could be. And I guess that's what your podcast is all about, really.
At the moment, yes.
Yeah.
This is going to be a whole different kind of discussion this time next year.
Yeah, I agree. There's some other things with some of the supporting characters. Carl Weathers' character, Grief Karga, is head of a bounty hunters guild, which kind of harkens back to the Bounty Hunters trilogy from the Legends line. There was a guild of bounty hunters that kind of formed together to kind of create some sort of bounty hunter code or whatever. And then Cara Dune, the female lead in the series, she's an ex rebel trooper.
Yeah.
And so there's, so she's a warrior herself. And so how these all intermingle with the Mandalorian is going to be really cool to see. And it does have hints, and it does have kind of some fingerprints of the Legends stuff. And that's what Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau said, hey, we have pulled from Legends some inspiration from the Legends timeline.
That's not surprising. I mean, considering, with Rebels rolling out Grand Admiral Thrawn again.
Right.
And then, of course, the fandom just loved that. I mean, obviously putting a new spin on it, but keeping a lot of things familiar as well. So I bet there'll be several instances there. And the other thing that I thought was kind of interesting from some of the footage we saw, I bet many people wondered, now granted, this isn't the same character, I bet many people wondered what IG-88 looked like in combat.
Oh, my goodness.
And then, of course, this is IG-11, which I wondered what the thinking behind that was, because it would have been so cool if that really had been IG-88 that you see in that footage. I mean, I'm cool with it being a variation of the same thing, but I wonder why they went the route of saying, oh, no, that's not him, that's this other one that looks just like him called IG-11. Still cool, but I wonder what inspired them to say, no, let's not do that guy. Let's do a new guy and make him look just like him look just like 88.
It is strange. Lucasfilm continues to, and the Lucasfilm Story Group continues to create new planets that look and give them different names that look like stuff that already exists. And I though I'm a super loyal fan, and anything Star Wars you put in front of me, I'll buy, watch, listen to, whatever.
Yeah.
But sometimes I'm like, you know what? I wonder what the thinking is there, where that planet, Jakku, looks just like Tatooine. And you have Qui-Gon Jinn, and then you have Jinn from Rogue One. And why, it's very confusing for somebody that maybe just has come onto the Star Wars scene or Star Wars fandom and trying to work all of this out. It reminds me a little bit of Tolkien and how many of the characters had similar sounding names, and The Hobbit, all of the elves had, all these similar sounding names. So there's a little bit of a maybe gravitas that comes with that, but for me, it's more of like a frustration than anything.
I think about that episode of The Big Bang Theory when Raj is wondering why all of the characters, so many of the characters in the Marvel comics all have a first and last name that begin with the same letter. And he goes through the litany of them, Peter Parker and all these others. It's quite amusing. But, there was a very similar reaction to both, wasn't there? Because I remember when the first teaser for The Force Awakens came out, and, it fades up into what looks like Tatooine. And as soon as that thing came out, everybody went, oh my gosh, they're back on Tatooine. And they said, no, that's not Tatooine. That's actually a planet called Jakku. And then the same thing happened here. That footage hit, and it was like, oh, we knew IG-88 was going to be on it. No, actually, that's IG-11.
Well, I think they are, if I'm not mistaken, they're kind of fleshing out the story, fleshing out for a droid, assassin droid. That's funny. But fleshing out the story of IG-88, and or maybe they're wanting to connect the IG-11 to, maybe it's a different model or something.
Yeah, maybe.
I don't know.
We're gonna know.
Yeah, we'll see.
Not long, we're gonna know. If somebody wanted to kind of dive into some things, let's just say someone hasn't had time to watch maybe Clone Wars. I know that's been out a little longer than Rebels. Or maybe they very much like comics these days. There's just so much to read. Sometimes it can be overwhelming. But do you have some recommendations that, some favorite Mandalore stories or Mandalorian stories, either through television or through the books, that you think are some of your favorites and might be kind of a nice little thing to read before diving into this show?
Oh, wow. There is the Republic Commando series, and it sounds like it doesn't make sense, but the Republic Commando series, written by Karen Traviss, talk about Tolkien-esque. Tolkien had created a whole Elvish dialect and subdialects there. Karen Traviss completely immersed herself in Mandalorian culture, because it was the Mandalorian culture that inspired the clones, and it was through Jango Fett and his training, and Cal Scarata is another character that you will learn about in the Republic Commando series. What Karen Traviss did is she kind of infused the Republic Commando and the clone training with Mandalorian culture, and it is fascinating and compelling. It's one of our favorite book series on Legends Library. When we were done reviewing the 5 books, it was kind of a bummer because she wasn't allowed to finish, because the storyline did change from a militant to a pacifist.
Right.
So she kind of had to bow out. But that storyline continues through the Legacy of the Force series. So I know I just dumped a whole bunch of stuff right there. So maybe if I could just simplify it. Really, the Republic Commando books are really cool to get a really good taste of the Mandalorian language and the culture and the military aspect of the Mandos, that clansmanship, if you will. So that's one of the things that I would say is a really easy go-to. And then it's kind of, I want to say, the Mandalorians are kind of sprinkled through the whole entire Legends line. So it's really hard. Besides that, it's so Mandalorian rich there, that the Republic Commando series. Besides that, you catch things here and there. If you want to hear kind of the rest of the story, which isn't much material to close up the Republic Commando series, the Legacy of the Force series, has 3 of the 9 books written by Karen Traviss, and she kind of continues the story of Boba Fett and what happens. And there's some really cool stuff about Boba Fett that I certainly wouldn't want to give it away. Really neat stuff in the Legacy of the Force Legends series. So I would kind of stick with those 2. I would recommend those 2, and then enjoy all of the Legends books, because that along the way you're going to get the Mandalorian character thrown in, here and there. Every little bit of information sheds more light on the Mandalorian.
Yeah, and obviously another thing people can do is check out your podcast, which is the Legends Library, and that's part of the Coffee with Kenobi Network, because that's what you guys do, and you've got co-hosts that cover a lot of this content. So that's another thing that I think is a great resource for people that are wanting to get into this a little deeper.
Oh, yeah. Thank you so much for mentioning that. Not only our show, but Coffee with Kenobi, Comics with Kenobi, Lattes with Leia, Rebels Resistance, all of those shows that are part of our network. Mm-hmm. We have Mandalorian fans throughout that whole network. Oh, yeah. My 2 co-hosts know more about Mandalorian culture I mean, they've forgotten more than I know.
Yeah.
They are so immersed in that. And so Cole and Lisa, my co-hosts, are very knowledgeable on the topic. And so whenever a Mandalorian character pops up in a Legends book that we're reviewing, they have a lot to share about Mandalorians.
Awesome. Well, we'll have a link to that on the show notes for this page, and of course we'll promote that on social media as well, so people can, like you said, not only find Legends Library, but if they haven't had a chance to check out some of the content at the Coffee with Kenobi Network. That's very much like you were just saying. I mean, one of the reasons why there's so many people immersed in this is because that network has been providing a lot of great content in the Star Wars universe for many years, so it's a good place to go. And considering the fact that we didn't know a whole lot about the show itself, I'm so glad we got a chance to talk about Legends, the Mandalorians, and what we may or may not see or maybe expect in the upcoming series today. Thanks to you being here. So, Randy, I appreciate you taking time to be on the program today. It was a great discussion.
Well, thank you so much for having me, and we're about to step into a whole new world here with Disney Plus releasing. So
yes. Every time we think they've done just enough to dominate the universe, they do something else that dominates it further.
That's awesome.
And we all just go, okay, yeah, we'll get that too.
Is that that's Val Kilmer as Doc Holliday? Why, Wyatt, I have not yet begun to defile myself.
That's right. Perfect. It's never a bad time to quote Doc Holliday.
Right on.
Well, as you heard Randy and I both mention, you can find, obviously, the Legends Library podcast at coffeewithkenobi.com and places where you typically get podcasts. You might already be subscribing to it, but we'll also have a link to Legends Library on the show notes for this episode at disneyplusstreamcast.com. I mentioned following us on Twitter. You can also follow them on Twitter as well at Legends Library. Well, if you enjoyed that discussion, I hope you'll join us again in 2 weeks as we discuss Disney Vault movies with Teresa Delgado from the Disney Vault Talk podcast. In the meantime, you can subscribe to this show on iTunes, Spotify, or Stitcher Radio. We'll be joining more networks in the coming days, and we'll announce those soon. You can also stream or download the episodes at DisneyPlusStreamcast.com, and while you're there, you'll find Disney Plus News and the Disney Plus Spotlight. The most recent Spotlight covers 3 Disney Plus shows that will excite your curiosity. As I mentioned, we're also on Twitter at Disney Plus Cast, so feel free to follow us there for more Disney content, videos, opinion polls, and more. Thank you so much for joining us today, and if you listened to our very first episode 2 weeks ago, I appreciate you not only listening to that, but coming back. We hope you'll come back again for a really fun discussion about Disney Vault movies with Teresa Delgado in 2 weeks. That wraps up this episode of the Disney Plus Streamcast.
The entertainment, adventure, and magic on Disney Plus never stops. So join us for the next episode of the Disney Plus Streamcast. You can subscribe to the show on podcast providers like iTunes, Stitcher, and Spotify. Search, stream, or download any episode on our website. While you're there, get news updates, watch videos, follow us on social media, and check out the Streamcast Spotlight. Just go to DisneyPlusStreamcast.com. Thank you for listening.